This City of Light, A Miraculous Ladybug Fanfiction written and narrated by Mira with artwork for the opening and thumbnail image by YANE on Pixiv. You can find a link to YANE's Pixiv in the description box. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and leave a comment. If you aren't sure what to comment, put skipping class. Please enjoy This City of Light, Chapter 7. Marinette Dupang Chang, Paris, France, the 7th of December. Today was, simply put, exhausting, and it wasn't even time for lunch. Well, okay, it was time for lunch, but Marinette got pummeled with so many questions about Cat Noir, and phones shoved in her face with pictures of her and him together over the past few months that she didn't have an opportunity to eat. And now it was time for her afternoon class, and, well, she was exhausted, both from her day and from lack of carbs. Marinette was grumpy, and she still had another 3-hour lecture to sit through. Unless she played hooky. Playing hooky sounded like a good idea right now. How'd your meeting go? Marinette sent a quick text to Adrien, settling into the lecture hall. If she just stayed here until it started, she'd lose the opportunity to skip out, so then she'd have to stay. Good. Her phone buzzed, and she smiled at the gif. It was Cat Noir giving a thumbs up from an interview a few years back. He was practically a baby in it. Are you still in class? Yeah, waiting for the lecture to start. Am I a bad friend if I try to convince you to skip? It won't take much convincing. Core class? Nope. Ah. Marinette waited for him to follow up, but it didn't come. Oh well, it was about time to start anyway. Still, it would have been fun to go back and forth with him during a boring lecture. A painfully boring lecture, actually. The kind of lecture you hate because you got nothing out of it and know you'll have to revisit the material on your own in the textbook while fighting the urge to refresh your phone and check every notification you've ignored over the past 2 weeks but haven't cleared out. Or is that too specific? All's well that ends well, or whatever that means. Marinette knew she'd have to spend time reviewing this, so she may as well do some self-care. Marinette went home and took a nap. She woke to the sound of voices downstairs, and with a big yawn and rumbling stomach, Marinette went to her trapdoor, stopping when she heard Adrien's voice. Adrien and her mother, actually. Something I love about Tom, her mother began, is how determined he is to love life. What do you mean? It took a while to love himself, just like it took him a while to ask me out. But what made me say yes was what he appreciated about the world. It was almost like an artist. He'd point out the color in my cup of tea, or thank his deity when he got a green light as he approached an intersection. He'd pull over when we'd travel just to marvel at a bunny. Things like that. Yeah, Adrien said. Who wouldn't love a guy like that? He didn't. Excuse me? Marinette caught herself leaning in, then sat down, out of sight, in front of her trapdoor. It didn't feel like the time to interrupt. He didn't love himself. All of the advice he got when he went through his depression was about learning to love himself, to write down things he liked about himself, and I wasn't shy with compliments, although I'm sure sometimes those hurt instead of helped. But that's what you're supposed to do, right? To get better? Don't you ever get tired of pretending to be stronger than you are? Marinette thought about that line, wondering where her mother was going with it. She heard Adrien take a breath and wished she could be there with him, But this wasn't her moment. So then what? I just keep on surviving? Survival isn't beautiful, Adrien. A scrape echoed off the table. You have to love being yourself. It's the same advice her mother gave her when they found her having a mental breakdown over ladybug problems, and it was like listening to a conversation from 2 years ago. Yeah, but you have to love yourself to love being yourself. No. She could picture her mother shaking her head. If you want to love yourself, then you're a stranger looking in, constantly judging if what you did was worth being loved. Would I love someone who did this? Even staring at yourself in the mirror, trying to like your smile can be betrayal. You wear your ancestors' smile, after all. Their cheekbones, their eyes. That's another scrape on the table. All I've wanted was to... Marinette leaned in, trying to catch the end of his sentence. I know, but you can't will the correct version or feeling of yourself into existence. And for someone like you, who defined their worth by people-pleasing, it's going to be harder to learn to love being yourself now that they're gone. I'm so tired. Then love being yourself. Marinette put a hand over her mouth, trying to not cry. She knew what came next. I don't know how. Adrien's voice cracked. If you love being yourself, then instead of making decisions that you think will be correct, you're making decisions based on what sparks joy, what fulfills you, what brings you happiness. I don't know what you mean. You're the main character, Adrien. Life isn't experiencing you. You are experiencing life. Silence passed, and Marinette knew the shuffling was her mother reaching to take his hand. Self-love is a burden before it's a liberation. As you learn to love being yourself, you'll also taste the flames of anger at people who treated you poorly. You'll want to scream and cry for letting them take advantage of you not knowing how to ask to be treated better. Growth isn't, Adrien. Growth isn't comfortable. Growth isn't. It never was. Self-love is not ecstasy. It's a soul-shattering process of tearing down the world built when you weren't loved the way you deserved. It's asking the world why it allowed you to go through all this, and the answer you get is a question of why you allowed it. That's not fair. He drew out his words. I was a child. I know, baby. I know. And getting angry at how you've been wronged is part of the painful healing process. She heard him take a breath. It just feels like I've already ruined my life, and somehow it's my fault. We all wonder that. Even you. I have a beautiful daughter and a husband who is, in almost every way, perfect, even though he isn't. I have a career I'm in charge of and friends to get tea with when I want to. And I curse the world for having so much in it that I want to see or do or love that I could never experience in 10 lifetimes, let alone 1. Then what's the point? Your loves will never abandon you. Marinette closed her eyes. This was something her father would tell her after she came out of a hyperfixation and felt like she'd wasted money. But they do, Adrien rasped. Adrien, every hobby you put in a drawer, every forgotten instrument, every Wikipedia binge will serve you when you need it. You remember my husband's favorite movie, correct? With the girl who played softball? Yes. She never went pro. She was just an office worker. But you know why he liked it? Because a love she had to leave behind, her love of softball, was enough to defend her when the office was broken into. Sure, her aim was a little off because her skills faded with time, but it was so exciting that the side character saved the day, not the coworker who lifted weights after work every day. Love doesn't waste away. Love serves, even with time apart. His chair creaked. We don't want heroes, we want ordinary people to do heroic things. Something like that. We want to see proof that we can be our own muses. I don't know if I can do that. Let me give you an example. Yesterday, Marinette complimented you. She wondered where her mother was going with this. She did? It was how happy she was you chose to go to bed early instead of staying up because you had a meeting in the morning. Okay. If you're trying to love yourself, then you'd say, I love myself because I made that decision and followed through with it. Right, that's basically what I told myself when I got home too. But self-care is empathy for your future self. When you woke in the morning, did you take a moment to appreciate the energy you had? Did you take a moment to thank yourself for going to bed early? She continued when Adrien didn't respond. If you stayed up and woke tired, you'd berate yourself for it. You'd take time to bask in the negativity and call yourself stupid. But did you take a moment, when you woke well-rested, to thank yourself for being the person who went to bed early? A moment passed before he answered. It feels silly to praise myself for doing the bare minimum. And yet you berate yourself for the bare minimum. Because Marinette knew his response was going to hurt. How can I be loved if I'm not what I'm supposed to be? When someone loves me, they tell me to reapply lipstick after a meal. They don't hate me or roll their eyes that it got on my teeth. But I need to eat my food first, before they get an opportunity to tell me I messed up my rouge. If I don't show who I am, then people can't show me they love me. Yes, being annoying isn't a death sentence. Having your life be chaos doesn't disqualify you. Remember when Marinette's room was an absolute mess last month? Yeah. Instead of going, ugh, you're a dirty birdie, you cleaned it while you waited for her to come home. Yeah? Why? Because we're friends. Friends do that for each other. And her having a messy room didn't disqualify her from your love. Marinette thought about her mother's clarity for a moment. She hadn't thought of it like that. And yet once, when she tried to clean Adrien's room when he hadn't emerged in 4 days, he fought her tooth and nail to stop. It's hard to let yourself be loved sometimes. You have an advantage, you know, her mother said, despite your parents' shortcomings. My ruggedly good looks? She laughed. No. Piano, fencing, Mandarin. Even if you didn't choose them, you have skills. The first assignment Tom's therapist gave him when we were dating was to go out and learn something and stick to it for 6 months. Because it's hard to enjoy something if you aren't good at it. Yes. If you insist on loving yourself instead of loving being yourself, then at least work on developing talents. And if I'm already talented, but still hate myself? Silence filled the room. Sometimes I wonder what the point of all this is. Of life, of existing. But then Marinette does a twirl to show off a dress she made, or I see bunnies playing with each other, or a friend comes over for a cup of tea and I think, oh, this is why. Just being alive is enough. You don't need to do anything to be deserving of happiness. And if I feel I do, then come here and we will love you on purpose, endlessly. You're our son now, and we won't let you forget it. Right down to annoying calls on Sunday afternoons if we haven't heard from you. Marinette stood slowly, so as to not make a sound, and went to sit on her chase. Those words were for Adrien, but her 13-year-old ladybug self hung onto each one. The girl who didn't think she could be Ladybug, let alone deserved to be. The girl who defined herself as a klutz and worried that everyone was just putting up with her, or who only befriended her because there weren't other options. Marinette? A tap came from the trapdoor as Adrien popped his head through. She didn't know how much time passed. She sat up, the guilt from eavesdropping eating her. Hey! I stopped by before, but you were asleep. Mom wants to know if you want dinner. Yeah, I'll come down in a sec. Great. He started to go down, but Marinette stood up and held out her arms. Adrien blinked, then walked over and wrapped his arms around her, his chin over her shoulder. Thanks. I love you. Thanks. I love whoever you choose to be. She felt him take a breath. Yeah. Yeah. I love you too. Marinette held the moment, the smell of his cologne, his hair tickling her ear. They couldn't stay like this forever, but she wished the moment could. But it didn't, and they stepped away. Will you eat with us? He looked down. I'll eat as much as I can. That's good. She didn't know if she could ask about what happened. I got approval today. Approval? He didn't meet her eyes. This must be what was on his mind the past few days. To see my father. Her blood stilled. Oh, Do you want me to come with you? He didn't move. You can't. Oh, right. Yeah. Thank you. Of course. She could tell he chewed the inside of his cheek. Dinner? Right. Yeah. I'll follow you out. Cool. Yeah. Cool. It was awkward, and she was awkward, but they moved forward. Adrien clearing mugs off the table as her father walked in, the warmth of the ovens downstairs rolling off him from finishing his shift for the day, and Marinette thought about what her mother said about living life. Even though her heart was heavy, sitting here with Adrien and her parents, with the Kwamis playing games on the island for the mystery goodie bag her father brought up for them, she understood. This is why. This is why she was alive. It was this simple and this difficult to understand. Thank you so much for listening. Chapter 8 is on the way, or it's already out. Blah, blah, blah. If you liked this, give it a like and leave a comment in the comment section. If you aren't sure what to comment, put family dinner. I will catch you in the next one. Bye!